Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Peya, Perek Shlishi Halacha Beis. We are learning Daf Koyach, Daf Chav Ches. We left off on Daf Chav Zayin Amid Beis by the Gemara, Mamish, the last line in the Amid. The Gemara will begin quoting a Braisa that speaks about Hamerug. Now, the word Hamerug literally means slipping, as we'll read in the Maharafulda. Slipping produce out of its place is a unique lashon referring to harvesting. Really, harvesting, you're slipping things out of their places. Really, we're going to have a machlokas amiroyim to explain what is the case of hamerug, and what's going to be gavaldik is that when we, thank God, we are referring back often now to a Mishnah that we have here on Daf Yud Beis, where the Mishnah begins, Klal Amru B'Peya. The Mishnah notifies us that there are 5 prerequisites that are needed for any specific harvest to be chayiv in Peya, and that is, it has to be Oichel, Nishmar, Gidulov Min Haaretz, Likitase Ka'achaz, that we just spoke about 2 days in a row, and Umachnisoi or Machansoi Likiyum. We don't have to translate all 5 of them, but when it comes to any one of these 5, what we'll learn today is, like, for example, Oichel. Oichel means, according to the Amoyde Rabbi Yossi, it has to be Ro'ui La'achila. L'mashal, what happens if a person is planting and they plan to replant that which they are planting? They don't plan to eat it. They plan to replant it. So the Gemara will notify us, it will be Chayv and Peya. Why? Just because you want to replant it doesn't determine that it's not oichel. If it's ro'ui la'achila, that's called oichel. That will be a very big yisoid that will clarify something that we never learned about before. We will have another braisa on Daf Chav Ches Amid Beis that's going to speak about leket, which we really will have prakim in this Masechta about leket. Leket, when you're gleaning, and as we'll limit, when you are cutting your produce dafka with a keli, if 1 or 2 ears fall out of your harvesting, it falls on the ground. The Torah says that the leket kitzircha, don't gather it, loy salaket, and we're going to limit the din of leket. And from those limitations of leket, we're going to come back to hilchos peya, and we're going to learn a very big klal. When a person harvests, they normally don't do it derech arai. The way we will define derech arai, piecemeal, is if they harvest a little bit to eat right away off the field. We will learn that midah oiraisa, there is absolutely no chiyuv peya when you harvest derech arai, and therefore, in certain circumstances, even midrabanan, if a person is going to end up harvesting their entire field piecemeal at a time, shtickle, they won't have to leave anything. And other times, midrabanan, more because of maras ayin, yes, you'll have to leave at the end something for peya, as peya, for it not to give the appearance that you did not leave peya. That will be a very beautiful concept that we'll learn about today. And Chavra, without any further ado, we can go without running. Daf Chav Zayin Amid Beis. In the Mishnah, we had 2 cases. We had the case of Hamachlik B'Tzolim. We had the case of Hamedel, where we will actually, God willing, tomorrow, on top of Chavtes, go back to the case of Hamedel. So I'm not even going to review that. Let's quickly review the first case in the Mishnah. Hamachlik B'Tzolim Lachem Lashukim L'Kaimim Yiveshim L'Goydan. As we explained, you planted onions, and when the onions are still a little bit moist, they are good to be consumed, but they are perishable. You're not going to gather it in your house because how many onions can you eat? But if you're going to sell it in the market, you can harvest. So a person had an onion field, and at one stage, when they were all lachen, he harvested part for the purpose of selling them in the market. And at a later phase, I'm not a farmer, I don't know if it means a day, a week, doesn't matter. He waited the time that you need for the onions to become more dry by leaving them in the ground. And then they are already fit for storage. you harvest them for storage. So as we learned yesterday, it's not just that you did it in 2 days in a row. It's not just about that. It's not only because according to Rabbi Akiva, lachim and yeveshim are considered two different minim. Not only because of that. More, since you harvested the day number 1 for one purpose, lashuk, to sell in the market. On another time, you harvested lekiyum for another purpose. That completely separates these two harvests. And therefore, we apply the rule that we began Perek Sheni with, that since the Torah uses the word satcha, that payah has to be left on a field only for its field, not from one field on another field, doesn't mean begashmias. It means here that you have to leave from every harvest, from the lachem, you have to leave payah, a 60th midrabanan for the lachem. And from the yeveshim, you have to leave its 60th for the yeveshim. That was the case of what the Mishnah calls hamachlik, and we said yesterday that why hamachlik? Hamachlik means to smooth. So the Marafuld explained, many times when you plug vegetables that are beiked in the ground, but some of the greens are sticking up, they're protruding above the ground, making the ground uneven. When you harvest it, you are also smoothing the land. So the lashon of the Mishnah is hamachlik. I'm saying that because now the Braisa begins with the words hamedug. The word hamedug means slipping. What does it refer to? We already see that different Tanoim can use different words for the same thing. How do you know that the word medug b'chlal means something slipping out of its place? So the Marafulda, look inside the Marafulda, hamedug ubetoisefta goyres without the vav, hamedrag. In other words, there's how do you vowelize it? But whether it's hameirug in the Braisa or in the Tosefta, hameirag, loshen hashmata. Hashmata means to something that's falling apart or slipping apart. Where do we have those words? Kisham to habakar. Kisham to habakar. We know we Hasidim know this, not because we should learn nach, but I'm saying the Alter Rebbe and the Kontrasachen, David, Zemirois Karisalohu, in that Kontrasachen, where the Alter Rebbe is explaining. Why was it, and that's what this pasuk is referring to, that there was a time where David HaMelech forgot that the Aron HaKodesh by Yidden, only Bakosef Yisou, can only be carried on the shoulders of the Levium, may not be put on a wagon. And when the Pelishtim finally understood the calamity of them holding on to the Aron Kodesh, after they captured it, which led to the passing of Eli the Kohen Gadol, and they returned it, when they returned the Aron HaKodesh. So what happened is that when we received it, the goal then was to take it all the way to Yerushalmi and HaKodesh. Ultimately, it got there, but at some point, under the guidance of David HaMelech, we put it on a wagon, and when we put it on the wagon, it says Kisham to Habakar. That Adak Taiches Kisham to Habakar isn't only that the Aron HaKodesh slipped off the oxen. Worse, that the oxen began to fall apart. The oxen began limb by limb to fall apart, which is what caused the Aron HaKodesh to start to fall. Uzzah chapped the Aron HaKodesh, it shouldn't fall, and he died. And the way the Alter Rebbe explained, just bekitzer, is that why is it that one of the Meri Nisim, Maisa Nisim was the Luchas, is that it did not, no matter what direction you read it from, you were able to read all of the oisius and the words. Normally when you have something that's engraved from one side, it's the face, the panim. If you read it from the other side, everything will be backwards. You won't be able to read it. It's like putting something in a mirror. Take words, put it in the mirror, you won't be able to read it. It's going to be upside down. In the Luchais, Masanisim was also that there was never an Achad. So the Alter Rebbe explains, because Torah has a panim and an Achad. The Getlichkeit of Torah is the panim. The Seichel of the Torah is the Achad. The Luchais was pure godliness. And that's why even people that carried it needed to face it. See, when the Levium carried on the shoulders, the mile of them carrying it isn't only the covet of carrying it, is that all of the Levium faced the Aron HaKodesh. No one was allowed to put it back to the Aron HaKodesh. When a person is connected to the Pnimius, they don't forget. Only when you are only connected to the Seichel of the Torah can you forget it. So since David HaMelech, the oxen's backs were facing the Aron HaKodesh. Since David HaMelech was connecting himself not only to the panim, but also to the achar, so it was shaykh for him to forget. So he forgot that the Bakesav Yisod. That's the way the Alter Rebbe explains. Anyways, all of this, Kisham to Habakar, is the source that the words Hamedug, and what is a Targum Taich? that what does shamtu mean? Are moirigoi. So here you see that meirag is the targum in Aramaic of hashmata, which is lashon hakodesh, which means slipping. Now, what does it mean slipping? It's not clear. And furthermore, let's read inside the last line. So hameirug, when you're doing the slipping, this harvesting that's called slipping produce out of its place, chayev b'tchilasei v'chayev b'soifei. Mamish enigmatic. Amedrish pelia. You're chayev to leave peya b'tchilasei, and again to leave peya b'soifei, not to leave b'soifei for everything. What does it mean? Daf koyach. Frag the Gemara ve'ai din meirug. What are we talking about? Machloikis. And here the Gemara is not only going to quote the Machloikis, the Gemara will explain why each Amoida did not accept the interpretation of the other. The Gemara does this a lot on the Babli in an expounded way, and the Yerushalmi, it's going to be done b'kitzur nimretz mamish. Why each one doesn't agree with the other. But first, what they say, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, the case of the Braisa is the case of our Mishnah, is the case of Hamachlik B'Tzolim. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah kahadot detaninan. It's like our Mishnah. The Braisa uses the words meiruk, and our Mishnah uses the words machlik, because when you take an onion out of the ground, you can say you're slipping it out of the ground. Hamachlik B'Tzolim lachem lashuk. And in addition, at a later phase, you're mekaymin. You're going to be mekayim division lagoidim. Mekayim means you're going to take it, but you're going to keep it for storage. You're going to be mekiyum. You're going to keep for storage. And the Mishnah said that you can't give from the latter step a 60th for all. The Mishnah, and there's no machlokes. You have to leave milachim al halachim, umi hayeveshim al hayeveshim. That's what the Braisa means. Chayev b'tchilase v'chayev b'soifah. Chayev b'tchilase means when you are harvesting the moist, that's the tchila. You're chayiv there to leave. When you do it, yeveshim lagoyden means for your own storage. You be makayim it, then you have to leave it again. In other words, the case of the Braisa is the case of the Mishnah using a unique lashon. Okay, now, Amar Rabbi Yosi. Now that would be great, right? Rabbi Yosi says no. That's not the meaning of the Braisa. We're talking about something unique. This will lead us into a Gavaldika topic. What's the unique? Hadein kitzcha. Now, kitzcha literally means the seed of an onion. So let me explain like this. We learned a little bit about this when we spoke about the thinning in the Mishnah, the thinning, that when you overly pack, when you plant things too close to each other, in the beginning, you're beginning with a little seed. Doesn't matter. At some point, when it grows, one will grow into the other. One will hinder the growth of the other. Remember that whole topic in Masechtas Nida of a sandal, God forbid. That's a lashon of a Mishnah when they were twins, and one squeezed the other into a sandal, God forbid. In other words, what happens is that you harvest them, all of them in our case. You're not thinning. You harvest all of them. Not bekavana to eat them. You harvest them to now replant them more spread out more than the other. That's the case of the Braisa. Nachamal inside. That we're speaking about a kitzcha, which is a little onion seed, that they used to, that's the way that was the seder. It was planted twice. You plant the seed all together. Look inside the, before we read the words in the Gemara, we can even read the Rash Shirilio. All right? Rash Shirilio is on the right column in Mamish in middle. Divrei Hamasvel Hadein Kitzcha, which begins in the line. Zera Batzel, the seed of an onion, is called so, B'lashon Arami of the Yerushalmi Arami. Arami in the Yerushalmi is Aramish and Greek, called Kitzcha. So says the Rashirilio, and we're going to read it. By the way, whoever has an art scroll, he didn't explain it the way that Rashirilio explains it, which is fine. There's always different ways. We're going to learn today the Gemara like the Rashirilio. That the Rabbi Yosi Palag ad Rabbi Yirmiyah. And why the Hahub Shita the Chayiv. That Rabbi Yirmiyah interpreted the Braisa to be saying exactly what the Mishnah says. Rabbi Yosi holds. Why do we need a Braisa for? Micah Mashmalah. We already have a Mishnah. We don't need any Braisa to say exactly a case of a Mishnah, ever. Everyone knew all of the Mishnahs by heart. The Braisa is to add something. That when you plant onion seeds, ritzuf means you plant the seeds all together. And when they begin to grow, they grow like asavam dakim. Look at your grass in your backyard. If you live in LA and you have a backyard, so you have a little. That means all together. They're not in rows. They're not in circles. They're packed in Yiddish. They're packed together. But that won't be good because then at some point they're going to hinder. One will grow into the other. So you replant them. To be shoysel means to it means you harvest and you replant. And now you understand why the Braisa uses this unique lotion of meirug. Meirug, not harvesting. Harvesting means you take them out and they stay out. Meirug means you take them out and you replant them. You slip them out of its place, but they stay in the ground because you put them back in there. Now it's a whole different thing. So what's going on over here? You would think, Chevra, that if you're harvesting the onions, you're not going to eat one. You're not going to dry one. You're not going to sell one. It's the way that they used to plant it. You harvested it, and now the second time around, you plant it spread apart and in a row or in a patch with a seder. So the Braisa says machadesh that you cannot say, since anyways all of them are going to grow, and when they're ripe, you're going to harvest all of them. Leave at the end, nish. Sagt the Braisa, no, that's the word of Ameru. Let's read the Gemara inside. So when you planted them in the beginning, ku'avid batzel dakik. Dakik means again skinny, small. And as we explained, since that's the seder, you planted them all packed together, the tzufim. Right, says the words over there, the ritzuf. So kat at shasal lei, shasal means replanting. Ku'avid batzelav, then it becomes big. And that's the Braisa that when you slip them to replant them, the Torah also is mechayev peyah. Now we already read in the Rasharilio why Rabbi Yirmiyah would not want to. Why Rabbi Yossi wouldn't want to say like Rabbi Yirmiyah, because according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, using his words is kahadot de tanina. Why do you need a brisa bidiu kahadot de tanina? Now the question will be that why doesn't Rabbi Yirmiyah agree with Rabbi Yossi? It's definitely always better to have a brisa speak about a new case, not repeat the same case. So di lo kain ma nan amin. Guys, whoever's reading the art scroll, I'm teaching it the way that Asherilya does. The art scroll learned according to the Maraful. Why didn't Rabbi Yirmiyah agree with Rabbi Yossi? Di lo kain ma nan amin. Why didn't you say so? Meaning you. Why didn't Rabbi Yirmiyah say like Rabbi Yossi? And the answer is, I'll say it by heart, David, because Rabbi Yirmiyah disagrees with this din. Rabbi Yirmiyah holds that whenever you harvest not to eat, like we quoted in our Hagdama, like we had in the Ois V'Hadar's edition, Daf Yud Beis, the Mishnah, Klal, Amru B'Peya, that you have to have the 5 prerequisites. The first of the 5 is Oichel. What's Chayv and Peya? That which is Oichel. When you are harvesting, slipping, to replant, that's not called Oichel. That's called Lizriya. Read it inside. Since the Batchila of Rabbi Yossi, of the Amoyre Rabbi Yossi, explaining the Braisa, Lizriya is Yehei Poter Mina Peya. It's exempt from Peya. So it can't be the Braisa speaking about this case. Period. We're learning it different than the art school. Now, well, that's the Rashadili. Now the Gemara counters. Let me tell you the counter by heart. If this would be Shitas Rabbi Yirmiyah, the Gemara is saying, hold on. When we harvest wheat, when you harvest wheat, do you know that the way farmers work, they don't harvest to eat all the wheat? You know why? Because what are they going to replant for the next season? Some of the wheat that you harvest, some of it is for replanting. When you have a business and you sell your shchayra, you don't eat up all the money. You take some of the money, and some of the money you have to reinvest. So if you, Rabbi Yirmiyah, will hold that something that's not harvested for eating is puttered from peya, which, by the way, would fit with the klal gadol klal bepeya. We have to get back to that. So every time you harvest wheat, we know that you have to leave peya for the whole field. Why? Why don't we say every time that every farmer yada inish benafshing? How much percent? I don't know. Let's say it's 20% you replant. Let's say it's 5%. Let's say it's 50%. From that, you don't have to leave peya. If that's the case, every time you harvest wheat, some of it is lizriya. Yet Rabbi Yirmiyah, will hold that you have to leave peya for everything. Nowhere do we find that you have to make that cheshbon. To which the Gemara answers, this is explaining Rabbi Yirmiyah, that chitim ruban la'achila. When I harvest, again, I don't know the percent, but one thing is clear, roiv is for eating. Something called, we follow the majority. When you follow the majority, even Rabbi Yirmiyah will hold that even though I know that a certain percent, minority percent, I'm going to replant, it's called harvested la'oichel. It's food. Chayiv on everything, on everything. But v'zeh, in the case of the way Rabbi Yossi explains the Braisa, that we're speaking about this kitzcha type of onion, and you replant it, ruba lizriya. By the way, ruba lizriya means it could be that when you pluck vegetables, the little onions could be they're edible. They're edible. You eat a few, but that's the purpose, is to replant it ala seder. And therefore, it makes sense why Rabbi Yirmiyah would argue with Rabbi Yossi, and he will hold that what? That cannot be the meaning of the Braisa. Why? Because in such a case, you won't be chayiv pay at all. The Braisa cannot say chayiv b'tchilasoi. So now hold on. Now we have to speak out by heart. So what does Rabbi Yossi hold? Isn't this a kasha on Rabbi Yossi? Everyone holds you follow the law of the majority. Everyone, it's a mishnah that klal amru bepeya oichel nishmar gedulav min haaretz oichel. It's not oichel. How can Rabbi Yossi interpret the Braisa that we're speaking about? You planted seeds when it grew a little bit, you plucked them to replant them, and that plucking is mechayev peya. It's not oichel. So it must be, that's going to be the good thing that we're learning today. What's pshat oichel? Oichel doesn't mean that you're going to eat it. Even if you know you're going to plant every single one back. Oichel means edible. Not you will eat it. Oichel means it's ra'oi la'achila. These little onions, if you would want, you can eat them the way they are. They're not inedible. They're just little. And that's the machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yirmiyah. Does oichel mean, let's say, bepoil? You will eat it. I'm not going to say bepoil. You're going to eat it. The purpose, or is it inherent? It's edible full. It could be the potential. Okay, very good. Now we're going to go in the other direction, guys. All of this is the way that Asher earlier learns. Edible for 4% at that point? No, for anyone. Small onions. There's a different type of onion. One that you want to replant, it doesn't matter. Not also. It must be. That's the whole point. That's beautiful. We're learning a big chiddush now. Al date de Rabbi Yirmiyah. Frag the Gemara. According to Rabbi Yirmiyah, Yerek Chayev B'Peyam. So what exactly are we asking? Look inside the Rashi, guys. Don't look inside the art school because we're learning the whole Gemara differently. Al date de Rabbi Yirmiyah Yerek Chayev B'Peyam is like six lines or 7 lines. It's in the middle of the left column of the Rashi. Koloimet. Al date de Rabbi Yirmiyah. The Palik Agavno de Mefarash Rabbi Yossi, as we just explained. Bishum de Savar the Yerek Hu. V'i mechayvin alei b'peya, v'shum d'chshehem mivushalam ugedulam iskaimen, im kein kol yerek nami l'chayv b'peya, toham minay machnisoy l'kiyom, no mekaymen mazero l'oilam. Gewaldige kasha. According to Rabbi Yirmiyah, that holds that according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, why does he argue with? Okay, according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, what's the kasha? The kasha is that that in our Mishnah, the yerek that's moist is not going to be durable. let's bring this ra'ui or bepoyo to our Mishnah. Rabbi Yirmiyah holds, it's Gavaldik. Rabbi Yirmiyah holds that oichel means you're going to eat it. Not it could be eaten. Okay. From the Klal Omer Bepeya, we have 5 rules. Oichel nishma gedul ben haaretz, and likitose ka'achas, and what's the 5th one? Umachansoy lekiyum. It has to be non-perishable. According to Rabbi Yossi, the Mishnah works. Let's go to not this case of the little onions. What's our Mishnah? You planted normal onions. You planted it once. You harvested the first time when it was still moist. Why? Lashuk. What does the Mishnah say? Lashuk chayv its own payah. Why chayv its own payah? According to Rabbi Yossi, I know why. Why are you chayv? What's the kash on this? It's non-perishable.
How's it non-perishable?
It's perishable. It's perishable. Perishable is never chayv and payah. So what's the answer? The answer must be that what? No, the Mishnah says you chayv and payah. The answer is that as it is, it's perishable, but it's roi likiyum. How is it roi likiyum? Dry it out. So in other words, the Gemara is explaining why Rabbi Yossi doesn't agree with Rabbi Yirmiyah. Aside of what Rashidilio says, then who needs the whole Brais? He's saying much more than that. In other words, it's like a rayim. It's beautiful words. Let's read it inside. The Mishnah's case is a proof that we followed the logic of Ra'u, that the 5 prerequisites don't have to be bepoyo. They can be bekoyach, Ra'u.
What's something that's perishable that we don't have to repair?
Almost all vegetables. The Rambam writes onions and garlic.
Onions and garlic because you can dry them.
Because people dry them. According to our sugya, the Gemara is basically saying all vegetables should be chayiv, yet it should be chayiv and payah. All that's the Gemara saying.
You can dry almost anything, no?
Not today, yeah. Then no. Correct.
We're saying so almost all vegetables are subject to payah?
Almost all vegetables are not subject to payah.
Not subject to payah, right?
Why? Because they're perishable.
Yeah.
Now, the Gemara wants to point out, let's go again, that Rabbi Yirmiyah doesn't hold, Al-Dati, Rabbi Yirmiyah, Yerek should be chayiv and payah. Or Yerek chayiv and payah. That's it. Of course not. So therefore, the kasha is, it's a kasha on the Mishnah. How can our Mishnah be mechayiv you to take payah from the lachem? The only answer would be is because you could make them non-perishable. But Rabbi Yirmiyah cannot use that answer. Because Rabbi Yirmiyah rejects that the ra'oi. So answers the Gemara, this will be the answer. That minoi mechanse lekiyum. When you harvested the lach, many people, or most people, would take the lach and they would dry it. That you are planning to sell it lashuk, but people would dry that. People, when they would harvest the little onions, they would not eat them; they would replant them. In other words, Rabbi Yirmiyah also is moida to ra'ui, but there's 2 types of ra'ui. There is that which everyone does, and there's that which no one does, but it's doable. Rabbi Yossi holds if it's doable, it's already enough. You pluck the little onions, they're edible. The whole way of planting this was to plant it and to shoislan. Doesn't matter. Chayiv and payah. Rabbi Yirmiyah holds it's not chayiv and payah because people would not eat them. It's lizriya. Lizriya is not oichel. It cannot be the case of the Brais. In our Mishnah, the lachem that you are selling in the market are perishable. They're not nishmar. The answer is because you could dry them, but he doesn't. You could because minay mechanse lekiyom. Beautiful.
Aren't most vegetables dryable? Or
I would say again that in our days.
I mean, back then they dried everything on rooftops.
They would not dry everything. They would dry many things, not everything. I don't think they dried apples.
And we
They
don't go
didn't
with
do it. The fruits,
we
many
don't go with
fruits.
the majority. We don't go with the majority.
And the that's what we're learning about. That
Right. Apples is dryable. I'm selling them.
I don't know if they. I think it has to do with the time. I really think it has to do with the time. Minik Hamedina. It has a lot. It has to do with that. When you read the Rambam, it's so mashma. If it's what people do.
But Rabbi, where does kavanah for the farmer come in? Where he's pulling them to replant them? Why is that not taken into account?
One more time.
No. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. The farmer who's plucking them
Yes.
to replant them to grow more.
Mhm.
Why does he have to be chayv? Yeah.
So it's really a machlekes Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yirmiyah. That's the whole.
Yeah,
that's
right.
the whole
So-
underlying sugya. That only Rabbi Yossi holds its chayv and payah because Rabbi Yossi has a chiddush that since it's edible, it's chayv and payah. Rabbi Yirmiyah holds you're not chayv and payah.
I hold by its feeling.
In other words, concludes the Gemara that the difference between the Mishnah and the Braisa, as we began with the Rashadilio, that the whole rejection of Rabbi Yossi to begin with, aside of the what we spoke about, is that he didn't want for the Mishnah to be repeating, the Braisa to be repeating the same case of the Mishnah. And that will be the chiluk. That ma avad Rabbi Yossi, the difference, it remains difference. The difference between the case of the Mishnah and the case of the Braisa is in the case of the Mishnah, Gomerhu, the Yabesh. The Lachim are not from Lachim to Yaveshim in the Mishnah. It's not growing more, it's just drying out. It's already fully matured. That's the case of the Mishnah. What the Braisa now is being Mechadesh is that when you are Meirug, even according to Rabbi Yossi, even when you pluck out little onions, that's not Gomur. They're not fully. If you'll put them in the ground, you'll benefit. They'll grow more. Since it's Ro Lachila, it's also Chayiv and Pei. And on that, Rabbi Yirmiyah argues, this is Gaval. Okay. So that's...
So Lefi Rabbi Yossi, you have to give 2 times pay on the same onions?
Yeah, no, 1 second, Shlomo. Whatever when you undid it, you leave in the ground, according to Rabbi Yossi, a few little ones. And I want you to know that those little ones will never become big. Because since they were planted so close together, so there's going to be some of little onions for the onion. And then, from the rest, you'll leave again. And according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, you don't have to do it. But L'Kula Alma, in the Mishnah, you have to do it twice. L'Kula Alma. Okay. Now, the guys stop Chav Chesam at base. We're good. This is Gaval. We're going to go to Leket for a moment. And by the way, it's amazing that on Daf Yud Beis in the Ois V'Hadam, right after we had the Klal Amru B'Peya, the 5 prerequisites, the Gemara began to tell us that from a extra word, 2 words of Ketzir, of Liksoid and Ketzircha, when the mitzvah, the obligation of leaving Peyam, isn't only when you harvest Kedarkoi with a keli, with a sickle, with other knife's instruments. The Braisa said befedish, even when you pluck it. Plucking it is that you rip it with your hands, but you leave the shaydish in the ground. Even when you're oiked is when you pick it up and you leave nothing in the ground, you're chayiv to leave peyam. But that was learned from extra words, implying that if you don't have extra words, when the Torah normally uses the words ketzir only once, harvesting means the way people harvest, which is with a keli. And that's this Braisa, and we're going to come back to Pei in a moment. Now, by the way, it's amazing that Peya and Leket are in the same pasuk. In Parshas Kedoshim, it says in one pasuk that ubekutzrechem es ketzir artzechem. So you already have ketzir extra. Ubekutzrechem es artzechem, right? Ubekutzrechem es ketzir artzechem. Lo yisachal pa'asot chol liktzoir. And in the same pasuk it says v'leket ketzircha lo yisalakit. The leket ketzircha means the gleaning of your reaping. The gleaning means that which falls out of your hand when you're doing ketzira. And as we're going to learn later, there's a certain quantity cut off. If a lot fell out of your hand, you could gather it. But if 1 or 2 ears fell out of your hand from every sickle cut, that you have to leave on the ground. Says the Braisa Tani that when it says v'leket ketzircha, the gleaning of your reaping, Dafke ketzircha. Ketzircha implies with a keli, with a knife, with a sickle, or other types of knives that people used to use. V'loi leket kitu. Kituf means a person is going to the field and they're harvesting by plucking it out. And as they're doing that, the same thing, one ear, 2 ears full, they are allowed to regather it.
This would go against Rabbi Yossi.
It's nothing to do with Rabbi Yossi. A leket, they never spoke about leket before. And the first the mitzvah of leket, the lav of leket is only by kitzircha. And even though, like we said, by peya, kitzircha isn't only with a keli, it's also plucking an oiker. That's because we had extra words. Liktzoid, kitzircha, ein, look on that few days on the top. Okay, now, hold on. You would think, like we just said, that this exemption is dafka not by peya. Dafka not by peya. When you pluck it, when you uproot it, you're chayiv in peya. Is machadish the Gemara? Yes or no? You see, you can harvest an entire field without a keli. That is what the Braisa said above. You're chayiv in peya. Leket, there's no din of leket. Chayiv in peya. You can uproot the whole field in one go. Why don't you use a keli? I don't know. So the Braisa is machadesh that leket no, peya yeah. But what happens if a person is not plucking to harvest the field? They want to have a nash. Today you have the samham of sugar. They didn't have it then. What did they nash on? They had an almond. They had kernels. They went to the field and they plucked it. You gave your kid behaved. They learned that Chumash Rashi. You gave him a couple of kernels. You motivated him. That's what they used to throw by the oifruf. They would throw a chitim. So says Rab Zeira, in the name of Rab Chia, b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, Hamalake shibolim li'isosoi. Here you're not nashing on it. I gave a bad example. You're not nashing, but you're not harvesting your field. You want to make one loaf of bread. Can you imagine? So you need some flour. You want to make a cookie. So, honey, can you go to the field and bring in over here a couple of ears? It's crazy how they did it. And then in the house, you would have a grinder. So you didn't harvest the field. You harvested what you need for one isa. Afilu kolshu normally is a word that's used even though you did very little. The Marafulda said, look inside the top Marafulda, afilu, the opposite. Afilu kolshu, afilu harbe kol mashu. Even if you ended up the whole field. You ended up a lot. A little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. Patim and apay. Yeah. You know, what the Babli would have said is, by leket, v'loy leket kituf. By peya, we learned above, you have to remember that we expected. By peya, if I harvest my whole field by plucking, I'm chayiv in peya. Right. And that says Rabbi Yechanan, depends. If you are in one go harvesting the field, you decided to do it with your hands, you're chayiv in peya. But if you did it piecemeal, let's call this derech arai, it's unusual. You did a derech arai, you did a little piece at a time, even if you ended up kol shahu, which means kol mashahu.
Didn't we learn before that if you do half the field, then you do pay on that half? Like we learned that if you don't do the whole field, that you have to do pay on.
No. When you harvest a field, when you do the first half, you have to leave on the second half for the whole field.
Right.
For the whole field. That's not called li'isasi. So you're right. So it's not that you have to harvest it mamash in one go. You can harvest it in 2 goes or in 3 goes. But that's different than this is a mamash a little bit at a time. Okay, now says Rabbi Lazar, who was the Talmud of Rabbi Yechanan, he is agreeing, but he's adding. You know why you're pater min apeya? Not because you plucked it. You're pater min apeya because you didn't harvest it. You took a little bit at a time, and therefore, even if you would have used the sickle, you also would have been pater. Rabbi Yechanan doesn't argue with that. Just the normally when you're only doing it le'isa, you don't need the knife. You don't need it. But it's, in other words, he didn't want you to misunderstand his Rebbe. It's not because you were malaketed. A malakit means with your hands. You gather, you pluck. No. Pnei Moshe. That afilu loy cut from biyad. Elisha cuts them b'mago. Ella b'derech hakituf. You use the sickle b'derech hakituf, which is mamish shuhu shibalim shibalim. Okay. Now, hold on. We got a problem. Problem is, comes along the Amoyre Rabbi Yossi, and he says, no. Patim and Apeya, yes and no. Patim and Apeya, but V'hu Shashir. This is a big statement. What's V'hu Shashir? You know when you're Patim and Apeya, if you did not end up harvesting mamish the whole field, which means that you can harvest 95% of the field that way. But when it comes to the end, for the last 5%, leave paya from that for the 5%, not for the whole field. If not, he will be arguing with Rabbi. Let's read inside the Pnei Moshe. V'hu shashir, it's like 4 or 5 lines at the end of the narrow. V'hu shashir b'sodeo v'loy lokat es kol asada b'derech hazeh. Ki'ir shier shibolam l'kotzra b'derech ketzino. You leave some of the field to be harvested normally, and ulahafresh only mayhem paya, but not paya for the whole field. This is the first widest line. For the little bit that you left. Then you're pot. In other words, if he would be saying that you have to leave at the end paya for everything, he would be arguing. He's not arguing. But he's saying, but you have to leave some paya from this field. You can't find a way out. Hold on. Rabbi Yossi cannot go against Rabbi Yossi. This Rabbi Yossi is an Amoira. He cannot go against a Tana. Now, in the Braisa, we have a Hatane.
Same Rabbi Yossi from before.
No, it doesn't have to be. Could be. We're going to have 2 Rabbi Yossis. In this sugya, they're clearly not the same. You'll see. That Bahatani, you had 5 grapevines, and Vuhu Boitzran Umachnis and Latoich Beisoi, same idea. Guys, when you harvest vineyards, the normal way is you harvest large quantities of grapes to press them into wine. Here we're speaking about someone who wants to eat grapes for dessert. So you went out to the vineyard, and he was machnis and l'toich beisoi.
All 5?
Eventually, not in one time. L'choira, the Braisa doesn't say only 4. The Braisa says patrum min aperet. Peret is the same concept of leken, but only by grapes. That when you pick a cluster, if 1 or 2 grapes fall on the ground, pratim, leave them on the ground. Let's skip the parentheses because it's not correct. Of course, it's subject to Arla and Rivoy, so we're not going to say. And you are exempt from Shikha, you are exempt in Peah. The only thing is, we're going to learn all about this in this Masechta. Leilos are certain clusters of grapes that are underdeveloped, that from the beginning you already notice these will never fully grow. The chiyuv of leaving the leilos is from when it comes out. It has nothing to do to the way you're harvesting it. The harvesting doesn't trigger anything. So bottom line is the fact that the Braisa did not elaborate further. The Braisa began with Chamesh Gefanim. Like you said, it's mashma in the normal case, that if you did not harvest it for wine, but you did a little bit, you'll be exempt from Peah, even if you harvested all of the 5. Not the way Rabbi Yossi limits it. So there's 2 ways of reconciling Rabbi Yossi with the Braisa. Rabbi Yossi cannot argue with the Braisa. Option number 1, Amar Rabbi Yudan, Khan goes to Rabbi Yossi, was Bigamuroi, so explains the Pnei Moshe. In other words, when the field is fully ready to be harvested, that's the case of Rabbi Yechanan. And as we spoke out in the introduction, that's the way the Mishnah Lamelech understands this Gemara. Midai Raisa, what Rabbi Yechanan says is emes for the whole field. You can end up plucking the whole field. Li Isa, another loaf, but there's a marasayin. The marasayin is when someone looks at your field and you see the whole field is taka ready to be harvested. And then they come back 2 weeks later and they find out that no payah was left. It's bad. Doesn't look good. Marasayin. So that's why Rabbi Yossi says, Midanabanan from marasayin, leave something. Leave at the end a few percent of standing, and from that, give only for that. But Khan goes to the Braisa, was when the clusters of grapes were not fully gemurais. And since they're not fully gemurais, when they're not completely ripe, people know that there are ways of exempting yourself from paying. So it's not going to bother them always. It bothers them. It's going to look bad when the field was fully ripe. That's approach number 1. Let's quickly hop another one-liner. Guys, Rabbi Yossi, this Rabbi Yossi cannot be the same Rabbi Yossi. Amar Rabbi Yosi, afilu tema kan v'kan b'gemuros v'kan v'kan b'she'ena gemuros. I'm not going to accept this difference. It has nothing to do whether they're fully ripe or not fully ripe. There will still be sometimes that you have to leave something. Sometimes not. When is that? Tamon means there means the Braisa. Kishabikesh la'oichlam anavim. When are you allowed to harvest all of it? B'derech if none of it is for wine, you're harvesting it to eat them. Like I said, for dessert. You don't have to leave any of. But Hache means in my colleague Rabbi Yosi, where he limited Rabbi Yochanan Shita, Kishebikesh Lasois Yayin, Azal Loshen, is that you wanted to make it into wine. This is extremely important. Look inside the Marafulda, 9 lines from the bottom, the middle of the Amid, Shebikesh La'oichlam. So that's the big cloud. The Loi Chiba HaToira, when are you chayiv to leave payah? By olives, by grapes, only if you're pressing them into wine. By koitzer, only if you're turning it into flour, which is the case of Rabbi Yochanan. You're turning it into flour. There you're chayiv. When are you not chayiv midoiraisa? Grapes to eat and kernels to eat. So if you're going to pluck kernels derech arai to munch on, then Rabbi Yosi would not have said you have to leave a little bit. In other words, if you're doing something that lechatchila is only chayiv midrabanan, then you add derech harai, and then you can do the whole field. If you're doing something which that type is chayiv midoiraisa, but you're doing it derech harai, then you're potter, but you have to leave a little bit.
You're saying it can't be the same first Rabbi Yossi because
No, because that's not the way that's not the way it works. We don't quote his name. If he's answering his own shita, the way the Gemara writes it is Amar Rabbi Yosi. So they asked him, so he answered. Okay. Gavaldik. The lechiva toira rak boitzel gas v'koitzel lisasi. Lefikach tzarich kan dafka shiur aval I boitzel lachila v'koitzel lekoloyos. If Rabbi Yochanan would have spoken about a case that a person harvested derech arai, he plucked, not to make one loaf of bread, but to munch on, then you would not have to leave anything. Gavaldik. To be continued.
Rabbi, what about raisins that are stored grapes?
According to this, we're saying that you're chayiv only with the Rabbanan.